The wind howled across the open plains of Cedar Ridge like it was grieving. The land stretched wide and silent, dotted with bare winter trees and fences half buried in frost. A rugged two-story ranch house stood near the edge of the valley, its paint worn by seasons and memories. That ranch wasn't just property, it was legacy. And until 6 months ago it belonged to Staff Sergeant Darius Cole. But tonight, someone else's car sat in the gravel driveway. A black SUV crawled along the icy county road, tires crunching over frozen dirt. The headlights cut through the dusk, revealing the man behind the wheel. He was tall, broad-shouldered, uniformed in quiet authority. Faded army duffel bags filled the back seat, still coated in desert dust. His name tag read Cole. After 11 months deployed overseas, most men returned home to hugs and home-cooked meals. Darius was returning to a nightmare he didn't yet know existed. His deployment had been extended twice, first due to escalating conflict, then because he requested to stay after his brother, also military, was killed in action 3 years earlier. Darius had no wife waiting at home, no parents left to greet him, only his ranch, his sanctuary, the land his father died protecting from foreclosure when Darius was 16. Every mile closer felt like breathing again. He turned into the familiar winding lane, expecting to see the old walnut tree and the worn-out shed with the bullet hole in the siding his father always said he'd fix someday. Instead, he saw something that made his stomach drop. A brand-new mailbox stood at the entrance, white, polished, with a different name on the side. The Walker family. Darius blinked, thinking maybe exhaustion was playing tricks. He pressed the brakes, stepped out into the biting air, and crunched across the frozen gravel. The nearer he got to the house, the more wrong everything felt. The porch light was on. Toys, children's toys, lay scattered across the yard. A woman's coat hung on the veranda railing. His heart pounded against his ribs. This was his house, his land, his father's sweat and his own blood paid for it. He never missed mortgage payments. He left his cousin to check the mail and made arrangements with the local HOA before deploying, or so he believed. A child peeked from the window, then disappeared. Moments later, the front door opened, and a man in his late 30s, wearing flannel and confusion, stepped out onto the porch. "Can I help you?" the stranger asked carefully. Darius stood still, fists tight at his sides, trying to keep the crack of disbelief from showing. "This is my home," he said, voice low, breath forming clouds in the cold. "My name is Staff Sergeant Darius Cole. I own this property." The man's face shifted from confusion to alarm. Sir, we bought this place 3 months ago. Through the Cedar Ridge HOA and a realtor. We have the deed. We've been living here since August." For a moment silence was louder than the wind. Darius's boots felt cemented to the frozen earth. He glanced at the barn, at the tack shed, at the pasture where he learned to ride as a boy. At the steps he rebuilt with his own hands. He could still picture the nail he bent, and refused to pull out in stubborn pride. Then, like a slap, he remembered the HOA notice before he left. Something about landscaping violations and unpaid dues. He'd authorized autopay. He'd asked his cousin Theo to keep an eye on it. How could this happen? The man on the porch shifted nervously. "Look, I'm not trying to start anything. But we legally purchased this house. We were told the previous owner forfeited it. The HOA said it was cleared and processed." "Forfeited?" Darius echoed, his tone going cold. His phone buzzed. A text from his commanding officer read, "Home safe? Need you at base Monday to finalize transition paperwork." He didn't respond. His pulse hammered against his temples as he forced his voice to stay level. "Where's the HOA office located?" The man swallowed. "Downtown Cedar Ridge. The president's name is Harold Mathers. But it's Sunday. No one's there right now." Darius turned his gaze back toward the horizon, where the sky bled purple into night. He'd survived deployments, mortar fire, and the crushing silence of loss. But nothing, not war, not betrayal, not grief, felt like the ache tightening in his chest now. The land he swore he'd return to had been sold while he was defending the country that allowed it. And someone was going to answer for it. Long before his name was stamped onto army paperwork and stitched above combat uniforms, Darius Cole was a barefoot kid chasing sunrise across the same fields he now stood outside of as a stranger. The Cole Ranch had been more than a home. Its soil held the bones of his history. His father, Raymond Cole, bought the land when he was 24, after working 3 jobs and living out of his truck. He built the house with rough hands and stubborn pride, one plank and one prayer at a time. His mother, Darlene, kept the lights on by sewing and selling goat cheese at the farmer's market. They didn't have much, but every nail in those walls beat with love. Darius remembered the day everything changed. He was 16. His father had fallen behind on payments after a bad drought ruined their seasonal income. One evening the bank sent a notice, final warning. His mother cried quietly at the kitchen sink while his father stormed outside. The next morning, Raymond Cole was found slumped over in the barn from a heart attack. The neighbors said it was stress. Darius called it shame. His mother held on another year before cancer took her too. He enlisted just 3 months after graduating high school, not because he wanted to leave, but because the army offered a way to save the land. His signature on the enlistment contract felt like a trade, his life for the roof over his head. He made every payment on time, even when deployed. Holidays spent in sandstorms, birthdays spent under gunfire. It didn't matter. The ranch was the only thing that felt like family. When his younger brother Lucas followed him into service, Darius tried to talk him out of it. But Lucas had the same blood, the same loyalty. 3 years ago, Lucas's unit was ambushed. Darius was stationed at another outpost when he got the call. The chaplain didn't need to finish the sentence. The radio slipped from his hand. He didn't weep, he hadn't allowed himself to cry since his mother's funeral. But something inside him froze solid. Lucas had always talked about fixing the broken irrigation line and repainting the fences. He'd planned to come home and take over the ranch so Darius could retire early. But instead, Darius found himself at a folded flag funeral with no one to mourn beside him. He buried the flag in his father's field, under the shade of the walnut tree. From then on, he re-enlisted without hesitation. Longer tours, volunteer extensions, anything to avoid the emptiness of coming home to silence. The ranch became less a dream, and more a debt he owed the dead. The only light in those years had been his son, Miles, now 8 years old. Miles was born after a brief, fragile marriage to a woman named Rachel, who could not carry the weight of being an army wife. After Lucas died, and after multiple deployments left Darius emotionally unreachable, she packed up and left, saying only, "I can't raise a family with a ghost." She left Miles with Darius's aunt in Fort Bragg, signing over partial custody. Miles rarely asked about his mother. He only asked when his dad was coming home for good, questions Darius never had the courage to answer. Before deploying last year, Darius spent 2 weeks at the ranch preparing for winter. He showed Miles the treehouse Lucas helped build. He repaired the barn roof. He even stood on the porch one night and swore he'd restore the ranch to something worthy of his family name. He set up auto pay for the mortgage, the insurance, and even the HOA dues. Hell, he hated the HOA, but he followed every rule to keep peace. He asked his cousin Theo, a mechanic who lived 20 minutes away, to swing by monthly, check the mail, and keep the walkway clear. Theo swore he would. So when the Walker family said they'd been living in his house for 3 months, Darius's mind flooded with questions. How? Why? Who signed what? Who allowed it? But deeper than anger was something colder, something familiar, betrayal, not by strangers, but by the systems that claimed to support the very people who bled for them. He pulled into the only motel in Cedar Ridge, the Willow Creek Lodge, a low brick building lit by a flickering neon sign that read, VAC NCY. The receptionist, an elderly woman with silver hair piled in a bun, glanced at his duffel bags and uniform, and placed a hand over her heart. "Welcome home, soldier," she said softly, handing him a key. Home. The word burned. When he got to the room, he didn't turn on the lights. He sat on the edge of the bed, hands clasped, elbows on his knees. His phone buzzed again. This time a picture from his son's school recital someone recorded for him. Miles, holding a cardboard guitar, singing off-key and smiling lopsidedly just like Lucas used to. Darius closed his eyes and pressed his thumb to the screen like it could transfer warmth. Then he saw the email icon blinking, dozens of unread messages, some from banks, some from insurance. And several, marked urgent, from the Cedar Ridge Homeowners Association. The first subject line made his breath catch, notice of lien and forfeiture proceedings. The next, final notice, property seizure due to non-compliance. Followed by a realtor's email, confirmation of auction completion, property sold, they had auctioned his land, sold his house, transferred the title, all while he was overseas in uniform. He scrolled, jaw locked, pulse pounding. One message from Theo, 4 months old, simply said, "Bro, call me a sap, it's about the HOA, something's not right." He never saw it. His deployment had been in blackout zones most weeks. He stared at the motel ceiling like it could offer answers. Instead, the only thing that came was the echo of his father saying, "Land is blood, boy. If you don't protect it, no one will." His chest ached with a hollowness that felt too old to name. He'd lost parents, a brother, a marriage, and pieces of himself in combat. But losing the ranch, being erased from it without a fight, felt like losing the last tether to who he was. And beneath all that heartbreak, something began to stir. Not grief this time, not despair. Rage, controlled, quiet, dangerous, the kind of rage that didn't shout, it built. And by morning, that rage would walk into the Cedar Ridge HOA office wearing a uniform and a name they would regret forgetting. Morning came without warmth. The motel curtains glowed dull yellow with winter light, the kind that made everything look colder than it already was. Darius sat at the small desk in the corner, uniform replaced with a simple jacket and jeans, but his posture still carried the rigid steel of a soldier. His duffel bag lay unopened. He hadn't slept. Rage had kept him company like an old, familiar comrade. He searched his email again, this time more carefully. The first HOA notice was sent 11 months ago, 3 weeks after he deployed. It claimed his front walkway was non-compliant due to excessive foliage and debris. It didn't matter that he had cleared it. It didn't matter that Theo had stopped by monthly to check. They fined him $150. Then another $300 for failure to respond. Then $500 for accumulated violations. When the dues didn't process, because the HOA switched their automated payment system without notifying homeowners, they filed a lien. 6 months into his deployment, they started the forfeiture paperwork. No phone call, no certified letter to the Army, no contact with his designated caretaker, Theo. Just silent theft disguised as legal procedure. He grabbed his keys and drove into town. Cedar Ridge looked exactly as he remembered. Brick storefronts, a bakery that still baked cinnamon rolls at 4 a.m., a hardware store older than most of the town, and a courthouse with a cracked stone eagle perched on top. But the town, like the land, no longer felt like his. The HOA office sat in a renovated historic building that once had been a post office. Large windows, white trim, pretentious sign. Inside, the lobby walls were covered in glossy flyers about community standards, beautification ordinances, and civic compliance. At the front desk sat Marissa Kane, HOA secretary, petite and polished with reading glasses perched on the tip of her nose. She might have been polite to most visitors, but as soon as she saw him walk in with a jaw like sharpened stone, she straightened. "Good morning. How can I help you?" she asked carefully. He stepped forward with the stillness of a storm before it breaks. "My name is Staff Sergeant Darius Cole. I own," he paused then corrected himself, "owned property at 17 Cole Ranch Road. I'm here to speak with whoever authorized its sale while I was deployed on active duty." Marissa blinked, then blinked again. Her fingers froze above her keyboard. Mr. Cole, one moment." "I'll wait," he said evenly, though the words carried the weight of gunmetal. She disappeared into a back hallway. Minutes passed. He didn't move, he didn't sit. He stood like a sentinel in his own stolen land. Eventually, out walked Harold Mathers, president of the HOA. Mid-50s, too smooth, too smug, a smile that pretended to be professional but reeked of arrogance. "Mr. Cole," Mathers said, extending a hand, "I was told you're seeking clarification regarding the property transfer." Darius didn't take the hand. "I'm seeking explanation, and accountability." Mathers lowered his arm, still smiling. "You see, Mr. Cole, we followed all legal protocols outlined in the Cedar Ridge Covenants and state compliance law. You failed to remedy repeated citations and outstanding dues. The property was forfeited, auctioned publicly, and acquired by a qualified buyer." "You knew I was deployed," Darius said. His voice didn't rise, which somehow made it more terrifying. "You had my forwarding address on file. You had my military contact information. You knew federal law protects service members from property seizure while on active duty." Mathers' smile thinned. "We acted within our authority. If mail went unanswered, that is not our liability. You could have appointed a representative. I did, and they failed. That is not our concern." Darius's jaw pulsed. The receptionist pretended to type but was clearly listening. A young woman nearby, probably an admin, stopped making copies mid-print, eyes wide. Mathers continued, pacing his words like an attorney rehearsing. "We also posted notices on the door. I wasn't there to read them," Darius replied. "Not our burden to ensure compliance," Mathers said flatly. There it was. Not an apology, not concern. A smirk hidden behind policy. Darius took a step closer. You sold land owned by a deployed veteran without reporting it to the State Attorney General, the Military Liaison Office, or the Department of Defense. You violated the Service Members Civil Relief Act. Mathers stiffened but held his composure. If you feel something was mishandled, you're welcome to consult an attorney. But the sale is final. The Walker family now holds the title. You no longer have standing over the property. No standing. The words hit like gunfire. Before Darius could speak again, another voice entered the lobby from the door behind him. You might want to rethink that last sentence, Harold. Everyone turned. Abigail Pierce, an attorney and former JAG officer, stepped forward, tall, mid-40s, coat still dusted with frost. Her eyes were sharp. She carried a leather folder and a fire most people didn't see until it was too late. Mathers blinked. And you are, counsel, she said simply. And as of 20 minutes ago, legal representation for Staff Sergeant Cole. Marissa's hands flew to her mouth. The admin quietly backed into the copy room. Darius hadn't called her, hadn't even thought of it yet, but someone had. Then he saw her name and remembered. Captain Pierce, the JAG officer who had helped his brother's unit after the ambush. A woman who had fought more courtroom battles for soldiers than most lawyers fought in their lifetimes. We'll start, she said, stepping next to Darius, by obtaining every document related to the citations, liens and sale. Then we'll move to formal complaints with the State Protection Board, Federal District Court, Military Legal Affairs, and, if necessary, the media. Mathers blanched. There's no cause for escalation. The process was legitimate. Pierce raised a brow. Then you won't mind producing proof of military exemption reviews, lien notifications to his defense unit, certified delivery confirmation, and homeowner correspondence logs. Mathers opened his mouth, closed it, adjusted his tie. There is also the matter of damages, Pierce continued. If negligence or bad faith is proven, your board could be liable for restitution, legal penalties, and in extreme cases, forced property reversal. Mathers turned pale. The Walkers bought it lawfully. We can't overturn a deed. We'll see, Pierce said, calm as steel. But before we get there, the court will likely freeze all related transactions, which means anyone currently living on that land is occupying disputed territory. A silence like winter ice spread across the room. Pierce turned to Darius. We're not done here, Sergeant, but we've started. For the first time since stepping onto that driveway, something in him shifted, not hope yet, but recognition that he wasn't alone. But the fight was just beginning. Because the HOA wasn't the only enemy. Somewhere in the background of all this, his cousin had gone silent. Miles was expecting him home, and the ranch, his family's blood, was now under another family's name. Worst of all, the town itself would soon divide, those who supported him, and those who stood with the HOA and the new owners. And when pressure cracks a place like Cedar Ridge, it doesn't crack quietly. It took less than 12 hours for word to spread across Cedar Ridge like a brush fire. By the next morning the town was split clean down the middle. At the diner near Main Street, old ranchers sat with coffee cups halfway to their lips, whispering about that HOA foolishness. At the barber shop, veterans who'd served in wars 2 generations apart shook their heads in disbelief. On Facebook community pages, posts began popping up, some defending the Walkers as innocent buyers, others calling the HOA's actions disgraceful and predatory. But the people with the most to lose weren't from town. They were the ones who started the storm. The HOA board. One by one cracks began to show in their manufactured confidence. Attorney Abigail Pierce wasted no time. She spent the afternoon gathering documentation, subpoenaing members of the board, and filing formal complaints through state and federal channels. She also handed Darius a folder thick enough to break a desk drawer. Everything we need is here, or will be, she said, sliding it across the motel table. But before we press forward, we need to talk to the Walkers. Darius hesitated. They bought a stolen home. How do you talk someone out of something they think they own? Pierce leveled her gaze, with facts and consequences. By evening she'd arranged a meeting, with the Walkers, their attorney, and a certified notice of litigation. The Walkers' temporary attorney showed up first. A young man in an ill-fitting suit who looked more scared than prepared. Next came the couple. David and Claire Walker, both mid-30s, clearly uncomfortable. They met at the public library conference room, neutral territory. A place quiet enough for tension to echo. Claire was the first to speak, voice tight. We're sorry for whatever happened to you, truly, but we bought the house legally. We have children. We sunk our savings into moving. You bought land from thieves, Pierce said, not harshly, but without apology. We don't blame you for that. But you're living on active duty military property unlawfully seized in violation of federal law. David shifted. We didn't know. The HOA told us the owner abandoned the place. Abandoned. The word hit Darius like a punch to the ribs. His hands tightened on the table. Pierce placed a steadying hand over the folder in front of her, a silent reminder not to break. One by one she laid documents across the table like cards in a game no one else knew they were losing. Here's the Service Members Civil Relief Act, she said calmly, which prohibits property foreclosure, seizure and transfer without special court approval when the owner is deployed on active duty. A pause. Here are the payment receipts from his bank, proving he was not delinquent. Another pause. And here, she said, sliding the final page forward, is the email your realtor received from the HOA, stating the original owner was absent and unreachable, presumed non-returning. That's not negligence, that's defamation of a U.S. service member. The Walkers looked like they'd swallowed stones. David leaned forward, voice shaky. What happens now? Pierce sighed. We're filing for immediate injunction to void the sale. Until then the court can temporarily freeze occupancy. The longer you resist, the more legal fees and damages you risk being liable for. Claire's face turned red, not with anger but shame. So what? You want us out, in the snow, with 2 kids? Darius finally spoke, calm, quiet, heavy. I want my home back. I want my father's land. I want my son to grow up where his uncle dreamed of teaching him to ride horses. I want my brother's flag back from the living room wall where I buried it. Silence blanketed the room. No one breathed for a moment. Finally Claire whispered, We didn't know. Darius nodded once. Now you do. The Walker's lawyer cleared his throat nervously. We'll confer and contact the court. They left without further protest. But the real battle hadn't yet begun. The next morning headlines broke. HOA accused of illegally seizing home of deployed soldier veteran returns from service to find property sold without notice. Calls for federal investigation into Cedar Ridge HOA. TV vans arrived before noon. Reporters lined the sidewalk outside the HOA office like vultures before a storm. Neighbors stood in clusters, arguing in hushed tones. Some supported the HOA, fearing precedent. Others rallied behind Darius, placing flags on mailboxes and writing "Support our vets" on poster board. Pierce prepped the court filings. But Darius had somewhere he needed to be first. He drove back to the ranch. The sky was overcast, the gravel crunched the same, but the house felt like a memory wearing someone else's clothes. In the yard, 2 children were building a crooked snowman, supervised by Claire. When she saw him she gave a careful nod, not defensive, not hostile. She called the kids inside. He didn't step toward the porch, he just stood by the walnut tree. The tree where Lucas once hammered crooked planks into an uneven treehouse. Branches bare, roots deep. Suddenly a voice spoke behind him. You must be Sergeant Cole. He turned. An older man with weathered hands and a veteran's posture approached from the road. He wore a faded Vietnam-era field jacket. Name's Edgar Hill, he said, stopping a few feet away. I used to serve on the HOA board, before Mathers took over. He's been running this place like a dictatorship ever since. You're not the first one he's pushed out. But you're the first soldier. Darius studied him. Why tell me this? Hill shrugged. Because someone should have stopped him a long time ago. And because you're gonna do what none of us did. You're gonna bury him in the laws he ignored. Before Darius could reply, Pierce's truck pulled up along the road. She stepped out, paperwork in hand, wind whipping her hair. Court accepted the injunction, she said. Effective immediately, the title transfer is frozen. The Walkers will temporarily vacate the property. You have legal authority to begin reclamation. Darius blinked, slow, controlled. It's not final yet. No, she said, but it's the beginning of the end, for them. And then came the finishing blow. A convoy of government SUVs pulled up behind her. Military liaison, state investigators, federal legal officers, even a representative from the Judge Advocate General's Corps. The army had arrived, not for him. For the HOA, Mathers, the board, the realtor, and the notary were all served in one sweeping action. Pierce smiled faintly. They're calling it systemic fraud. You're not the only one, not just one home, not just one family. They had done this to others, veterans, elderly homeowners, single parents, people who couldn't fight back, until now. And with that truth came something unexpected. The U.S. Army wasn't just helping him reclaim his ranch, they were about to take back every house the HOA had stolen. The storm had been cold, merciless and long, but now, it was beginning to break. Snow fell softly over Cedar Ridge the morning the army stepped fully into the fight, not with weapons but with law, authority and a promise to its own. What began as a personal nightmare for one man had become a reckoning for an entire system. Within 48 hours, federal investigators uncovered a bitter truth. The Cedar Ridge HOA had quietly seized and resold 7 properties in the past 4 years, all under the guise of non-compliance, abandonment, or violation penalties. Families who'd moved away, relocated for work, or, like Darius, deployed in service of the country, had been stripped of their land while trusting the system to protect them. But the system had forgotten them, until now. Judge Advocate General's Corps attorneys filed motions to nullify every sale conducted under fraudulent circumstances. The military liaison to the Department of Housing requested an emergency injunction to freeze all HOA-authorized property titles pending review. The state attorney general launched a criminal investigation, and Mathers, once smug, untouchable and calculating, was escorted out of the HOA building by federal officers. His composure shattered. He didn't get to finish his coffee. The board members who had signed off on the property seizures turned on each other with desperate denials. Some pleaded ignorance. Others pointed fingers. But every signature, every vote, every ignored warning email was documented, time-stamped, and stacked in neat, accusing files. The town watched everything unfold. Reporters filmed from the sidewalks. Veterans stood in silent lines of support near the courthouse. Retired farmers and widows came forward with stories they'd never told, of threats, fines, and forced buyouts. The shame of the HOA's silence became the town's loudest echo. But through all of it, Darius kept his focus on one thing: the ranch. A week after the injunction, the Walkers officially and voluntarily vacated the property without hostility. They left a note on the kitchen counter for Darius that read, "We didn't know, we're sorry, we hope justice takes you home." Claire and David, they even left his father's old workbench untouched in the barn. That morning Abigail Pierce stood beside him as he unlocked the front door for the first time in nearly a year. The hinges creaked. The air inside was still warm. The Walkers had kept the heat on. The rooms were sparsely furnished now, boxes stacked neatly, curtains drawn aside. It felt unfamiliar and familiar all at once. He didn't walk through the house first. He went straight to the backyard, to the walnut tree. Snow clung to the bark in ribbons. The ground beneath it was dark where the wind had swept it clear. He knelt there, brushing his glove across the earth, where Lucas's flag still lay buried below the roots. Pierce stood back, silent. Darius closed his eyes, and the cold air finally felt clean, not cruel. When he stood, something in his chest was lighter. Later that afternoon, a government representative approached him outside the property, a tall woman in uniform with silver at her temples. "We're not just restoring your deed," she told him. "We're invalidating every fraudulent sale they conducted. Every family displaced will be contacted and given the chance to reclaim their home. The Army will be supporting each case directly." "Every family?" he asked quietly. "Every one," she said. "This doesn't end with you. It begins with you." He nodded once, eyes steady on the horizon. 3 days later he stood in state court, uniform pressed, boots shined, posture straight as a column of granite. Behind him sat veterans, neighbors, farmers, old teachers, local pastors, even the Walkers. Beside him stood Pierce, armed not with weapons but with facts. The judge listened to testimony, reviewed documentation, and issued her ruling. The HOA's actions were unlawful. The sale was voided. The title would be restored to Staff Sergeant Darius Cole, and a full criminal and civil investigation would proceed against the board members involved. But the ruling didn't end there. A special court order suspended the HOA's authority indefinitely, and placed the neighborhood under county supervision until a new legally audited council could be formed. State and federal watchdogs would monitor all future actions. It was more than a victory, it was a warning. Outside the courthouse cameras flashed. Someone tried to push a microphone toward him, asking how it felt to win, but Darius didn't speak to them. Instead, he dialed a number saved in his favorites. It rang twice. Then came a small, sleepy voice. "Dad?" He'd left 3 voicemails since landing. He'd promised he'd call when things were settled. He didn't realize until this moment, things didn't need to be perfect for him to come home. "Hey big man," he said, voice soft but strong. "Pack up your stuff. I'm bringing you home." "To the ranch?" Miles asked, instantly more awake. "Yeah," Darius said. He looked up at the sky, where the winter clouds were beginning to part. "To the ranch. That weekend he and Miles stood side by side at the porch railing. The snow was melting in patches across the fields. The earth, once frozen over, was showing signs of thaw. Miles tugged on his coat sleeve. "Can we fix the treehouse like you said?" he asked. Darius looked at the branches above, then down at his son. The future of the land his father once bled for. "Yeah," he said quietly. "We'll fix everything." And they would. Not just the house, not just the land. The trust, the legacy, the belief that what's stolen can be reclaimed, and what's broken can be rebuilt. In the weeks that followed, other families returned. Some cried in doorways they thought they'd never see again, some kissed the ground. Some just stood in silence, overwhelmed by the justice they thought would never come. The army helped each of them navigate the legal maze, restoring dignity where it had been ripped away. The HOA office building, once polished white and proud, now sat empty, locked behind tape notices and investigation seals. Locals stopped calling it headquarters. They started calling it what it had become, a monument to the day people stopped being silent. As winter gave way to brighter skies, Darius sat on the porch with coffee in hand and Miles leaning against his shoulder. The land was quiet, but no longer in mourning. For the first time in years he didn't feel like a man returning from war. He felt like a man coming home, and this time, no one would take it from him again.